Sorry, her daughter-in-law said at the door. She doesn't want strangers at Christmas dinner. Maggie blinked. Her own son wouldn't meet her eyes, so she turned, walked back to the car without saying a word. By nightfall, the deed was pulled. The locks were scheduled, and the silence was official. They'd called her a stranger in the house she still legally owned. Now they'd find out what happens when the stranger has the title. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The pie was still warm when Margaret Harris stepped out of her car. The tin cradled in a kitchen towel that smelled faintly of nutmeg and old cinnamon. Snow fell gently, feathering onto her coat shoulders and melting into her gray curls. The lights in Brian's house gleamed through the frosted windows, soft yellow glows, moving shadows, silhouettes of someone laughing near the kitchen. She imagined Rachel in there somewhere, maybe stringing popcorn for the tree. The image made her chest ache in that quiet, stubborn way. She paused on the front step, balancing the gifts in one arm, wrapped in forest green paper, each tag handwritten with her looping cursive. A pair of flannel pajamas for Rachel, a book for Brian, for Kelly, well, a gift card to a spa. Maggie had looked up carefully online. Polite, not too personal. She rang the bell. Footsteps approached. She straightened, pasted on a hopeful smile, and braced for the usual lukewarm welcome. But when the door opened, Kelly stood there alone. No smile, no Rachel, just the low hum of Christmas music behind her. Kelly's arms were folded, cardigan sleeves pulled tight over her wrists. "Oh," she said flatly. "You're early." "It's 5 o'clock," Maggie said gently, holding up the pie like a peace offering. "Dinner invitation said 6, but I thought I'd come help set the table." Kelly's lips twitched into something like a grimace. Right, from somewhere behind her, Maggie heard Brian's voice, low, muffled, probably asking who it was. He didn't come to the door. "I'm sorry," Kelly said after a beat, eyes scanning the pie, the gifts, the driveway. "But my daughter-in-law doesn't want strangers at dinner." Maggie blinked. "I beg your pardon." Kelly leaned in slightly, as if sharing a secret she didn't want overheard. "She doesn't feel comfortable with non-funny. It's been a stressful year. We're trying to keep things low-key, intimate." Maggie stared at her. "I'm Brian's mother." "I know," Kelly said, already starting to close the door. "I hope you understand." The door clicked shut. No footsteps followed. No apologies. Just the thud of her heart in her ears and the sudden sharp smell of burnt sugar. The towel was getting too close to the pie tin. Maggie stood there a moment longer, breathing through the cold. Snowflakes gathered on her lashes. Inside, a burst of laughter came from the kitchen. A child's voice, Rachel's maybe, rose over the music. The warmth in those sounds pressed against her like glass. She turned away slowly, carefully, and descended the steps as if she were walking on splinters. She didn't cry. Not even in the car. Instead, she drove back toward Cheeseman Park in silence. Denver's streets emptying under a hush of falling snow. The pie sat untouched on the passenger seat. Her hands, red and cold, gripped the steering wheel tighter at every red light. The world outside her windshield was all white edges and muted lights, like the city had slipped into a memory she couldn't quite hold on to. By the time she reached her apartment, the silence had thickened into something more than loneliness. Something deliberate. She didn't flip on the lights, just placed the gifts on the counter, unwrapped her scarf, and opened the fridge door. The empty shelf stared back. She looked down at the pie in her hands. It wasn't that she needed their dinner. It wasn't even about the food. She placed the pie on the table, sat down across from it, and stared at it for a long time until the heat faded completely and the cold set in. Then she rose, went to the hall closet, and pulled out the folder she hadn't touched in years. The one marked in black ink, Highlands Ranch, co-signed documents. The clasp snapped open, and everything began to shift. Maggie spread the documents out across the kitchen table. The cold pie pushed aside, its crust now pale and uninviting. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose as she flipped through stiff pages, their edges slightly curled with age. The folder smelled faintly of ink and dust. And the years she'd spent trying not to think about it. The stack was thicker than she remembered. Loan schedules, appraisal reports, tax assessments, but tucked between 2 refinance notices was the one she'd forgotten she even had, the deed. Harris Brian S. and Harris Margaret J. Her own name in ink in full. Nowaran Thort Noastadis, just side by side with her sons on the official letterhead from the county recorder's office. She stared at it, heartbeat slowing to something sharp and deliberate. There it was. After all these years, she hadn't just signed to help Brian qualify. She had signed to own the memory. Came back in slices. Brian, in his early 30s, flushed with excitement about buying their forever home. Kelly flipping through kitchen tile samples, like a game show contestant. Maggie had walked into the bank appointment, like a safety net, ready to backstop his dreams. The mortgage officer had said it was a formality, just a signature, no real risk. Kelly had never asked her to sign. Maggie had never volunteered that she had. Now it felt like they'd both built a house on a secret cheap. Picked up her phone, fingers cold against the screen, and tapped in the number from the county assessor's website. It rang twice before a clipped professional voice answered. Denver County Title Office, Donna speaking. Maggie cleared her throat. Yes, hi, I'm trying to confirm the ownership status of a residential property in Highlands Ranch. It's under my name and my son's. I have the deed here, but I'd like to make sure it's current. Okay, Donna said briskly. Do you have the parcel number or address? Maggie read it off, voice steady, eyes fixed on the corner of the page, where her signature curled in black ink like a strand of her younger self. She could hear Donna's typing in the background, keys clicking like distant raindrops. Then, yes, still active. Primary owners Brian S. Harris and Margaret J. Harris. Both parties listed on the warranty deed. Last modified 12 years ago. Maggie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. No changes since then, she asked. None recorded. She ran a finger along the bottom edge of the deed, tracing her own name. Thank you, she said quietly. No problem. Would you like a certified copy sent to your address? Yes, Maggie said. Please. Donna took her mailing info and politely disconnected. The silence afterwards seemed to hum with something electric. Maggie stood there staring at the table, so much for being a stranger. She walked to the cabinet, poured herself a glass of water, and sipped slowly, thinking, not with rage. Not yet. Something more precise was forming. She couldn't put a name to it yet, but it had weight and shape, and it didn't feel like surrender. She reached for her phone again, opened her contacts, and scrolled past Brian's name. Instead, she tapped Tina Lopez. The call rang twice before Tina's voice came on. Warm, direct, slightly winded. Mags, everything okay? Maggie looked at the papers again, then out the window, where snow still floated down in flakes like falling time. I think I just remembered something important, she said softly. Can I come by the cafe tomorrow? Tina didn't miss a beat. I'll put the kettle on. Maggie hung up. The deed remained on the table, her name bold and irrefutable. She folded it carefully and slid it back into the folder, then added a yellow sticky note across the front. Certified copy ordered, December 24th. She pressed the folder flat with her palm, then slowly ran one hand across the surface, like closing a book. She was finally ready to rewrite. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Maggie stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around her like a wool coat. Cinnamon, espresso, and brown sugar hung thick in the air. And Bing Crosby crooned low from a retro radio perched behind the counter. Tina Lopez stood near the espresso machine, sleeves rolled up, flowers streaked across her apron and cheek like war paint. When she spotted Maggie, she tossed a rag on the counter and waved her over. You look like hell, she said, not unkindly. Maggie cracked a tight smile. Merry Christmas to you, too. They settled in the back corner booth near the window, fogged from the heat inside and the chill without. Tina slid to steaming mugs across the table, hers black, Maggie's with a cinnamon stick floating inside. Maggie didn't rush. She sat still for a long moment, eyes on the window, watching a couple carry a bundled toddler across the snowy sidewalk. The girl's boots lit up with each step, blinking red and blue. Then Maggie said quietly, she wouldn't let me in. Told me her daughter-in-law didn't want strangers at dinner. Tina froze mid-sip. What she said. She said it just like that, not family, stranger. Tina's eyes narrowed. That entitled little Maggie raised a hand gently. It's not about what she said, it's what I remembered afterward. She reached into her bag, pulled out the manila folder, and slid it across the table. Tina opened it with care, flipping past the front page until she hit the deed, her brow furrowed. Your name's on it. I co-signed when Brian couldn't qualify. They never refinanced, never removed me. Tina stared at her. So, you still own part of that house? Maggie nodded slowly, her fingers curling around her mug, and neither of them seemed to realize it. A pause. Then Tina sat back hard against the booth. You could take them to court. I don't want to start a war, Maggie said evenly. But I won't be dismissed like that. Not in a house I helped them keep. Tina's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. You don't need a war. You need a lawyer. I already scheduled a consult, Maggie said, eyes steady. Charles Denton. Remember him? Helped my friend Ruth with that property dispute on Kaifax. He knows real estate law backwards. Tina's eyes sparkled now. The one who wears bow ties and calls everyone ma'am. He's a shark. Exactly, Maggie murmured. Tina leaned forward, elbows on the table. So, what's the plan? Full confrontation? Mediation? You want your name off. You want rent, equity. I don't know yet, Maggie admitted, but I'm not acting out of hurt. I'm acting out of ownership. I want to know my rights fully, and I want to do this clean, legal, strategic. Tina gave a low whistle. Now, that's the Maggie I remember. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee as snow thickened outside. A little girl pressed her nose to the window glass beside them, giggled, and ran off after her mother. Maggie glanced at the old clock above the bakery counter. My appointment's in an hour. Downtown. No way you're driving in this, Tina said. Already standing, she untied her apron, grabbed her coat from the wall hook, and snatched up her keys. You're not showing up to a legal meeting with Kelly's smug face burned into your rear view. Let me take you, I'll drop you. Wait at that tea shop on Wazy, and if the meeting goes sideways, I'll swing by with a sledgehammer and bail money. Maggie laughed, actually laughed, and stood, sliding her arms into her coat. You're a menace. I'm your menace, Tina replied, looping her arm through Maggie's as they headed for the door. Let's go shake the city a little. The snow clung wet and heavy to Maggie's boots as she stepped into the old Lodo office building. The warmth inside hit her like a soft slap, radiators hissing faintly, the smell of lemonwood polish, and the quiet echo of distant heels on marble. Tina had dropped her at the curb with a thumbs up and the threat of a cinnamon bun if things got ugly. Maggie checked in with the receptionist, young, brisk, headset tilted, and sat down in a leather chair that crackled under her coat. She held the envelope in her lap like it was glass. Inside, the certified deed, mailed overnight and still smelling faintly of printer ink and cardboard. The office door creaked open. Mrs. Harris, Charles Denton, was exactly as she remembered. Gray suit, burgundy bow tie, the kind of man who looked like he read contracts for fun. He extended a hand, warm and steady, and led her into a room lined with legal books and framed newspaper clippings. One photo showed him shaking hands with someone who'd later become a judge. He waited until she sat before settling in across the desk. You've brought something. Without speaking, Maggie slid the envelope forward. He opened it, scanned the contents, and gave a low hum of recognition. Warranty deed certified, and here we go. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship, not a mere guarantee. You're a coner. Maggie kept her expressions still. Charles looked up at her, thoughtful. Did you know this all along? I knew I signed something real, she said quietly. But I let myself forget the details for peace. He nodded. It happens. Peace, unfortunately, often costs more than it should. He flipped through the deed again, noting the dates, annotations, the lack of any amendments. They never refinanced, never filed a quitclaim. You were never removed. That means you hold full legal ownership, access, equity, and yes, depending on how the property is being used, even a right to claim a portion of rental or usage value. Maggie took a slow breath. They've lived there for 12 years. Indeed, Charles said, leaning back. And during that time, they've treated you as an outsider, she said flatly. He drummed his fingers once on the edge of the desk, then stopped. You'd be well within your rights to petition for partition, force a buyout or a sale, or simply assert your right to enter. Depends on what you want. That hung in the air like a suspended verdict. Outside the window, flurries danced between buildings, the glass pane frosting faintly along the edges. Maggie sat motionless, watching them, her fingers folded tight in her lap. Charles waited. Then softly she said, I want respect. A pause and maybe more. Charles's lips curved, not into a smile, but something close to satisfaction. That's a start. He reached for a legal pad. Let's begin with documentation. I'll need to draft a file on this. Build out your chain of title, note your percentages, and prepare an outline of potential next steps. He glanced up. Are you anticipating resistance? Maggie's jaw set. I'm counting on it. She reached into her purse, pulled out a smaller envelope, and slid it across. Inside, printed screenshots of Kelly's recent holiday posts. Photos of the house, the new countertops Maggie had helped finance once upon a time. Hashtags like #OneOurHome and #OneFamily, only below every smiling caption. Charles reviewed one photo, his brow raised slightly. They've been making improvements. Many, Maggie said. He nodded, tapping his pen twice. That adds value. Useful if we get into appraisals. Maggie nodded back, not with joy, not even with triumph. Just a calm that felt ironclad. Charles capped his pen. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. In the meantime, don't engage. Don't tip your hand, let the law do the talking. She rose slowly, tucking the folder back into her purse, her steps suddenly lighter. As she reached the door, he called out, Mrs. Harris. She turned. Whatever your next move is, just be sure it's yours. She nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway, the soft click of her boots echoing against the marble as she moved forward. Finally, entirely on her own terms, Maggie sat at her kitchen table that morning, longer than usual, her fingers wrapped around a mug of Earl Grey that had long since gone cold. The folder from Charles still sat in front of her, the certified deed tucked neatly inside, as though the paper itself might shift at any moment and say, go back, look again. She didn't need it to speak. Instead, she pushed herself up from the chair, moved to the hallway, and opened the drawer where she kept small, forgotten things, spare light bulbs, stray batteries, and on the very back hook, a key ring with 3 familiar silver keys, and a charm shaped like a heart. The enamel had worn off the edges of the tiny #1 Nana inscription, but she remembered exactly where it had come from. Rachel had given it to her after a second-grade Christmas program. Cheeks still pink from singing under hot stage lights, Maggie slipped the keys into her coat pocket and zipped it up slowly. Her movements were steady, unhurried, like someone following a rhythm only they could hear. The drive to Highlands Ranch was quiet, a stretch of clear road flanked by snowbanks that glistened in the morning sun. She kept the radio off, the silence inside her car thicker than any music could fill. When she pulled up to the curb just down the street from the house, she scanned the driveway from behind a stand of frost-dusted pines. Both cars were gone. It was the middle of a workday. She knew their routines. Maggie stepped out and began the walk toward the home she had once helped purchase but hadn't stepped inside freely in more than a decade. Each footfall on the salted pavement sounded like a reminder of how easily a person could be erased from the narrative of their own generosity. The house stood quietly under a fresh dusting of snow. Its shutters were now painted slate blue instead of forest green. The porch had new wooden railings and an expensive-looking pendant light overhead. The wreath on the door looked this year, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly impersonal. Bafthi stood on the front step, hesitating only briefly before drawing out the keys. She selected the largest one and slid it into the lock, her breath fogging the air in a soft cloud. The key turned smoothly. The click of the door unlocking felt louder than it should have. She stepped inside. The interior was as clean and curated as a home in a magazine spread. There were no shoes by the door, no stray coats thrown over the banister, no dog hair, no mess. The hardwood floors gleamed. She could smell lavender and lemon oil, a synthetic, sharp sort of cleanliness that replaced the cozy warmth she remembered from the early days. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her steps were careful but confident as she walked through the front hall into the living room. The furniture was new, gray-toned, angular, expensive. The fireplace had been completely redone, with textured stone. On the wall, above it hung a custom wooden sign, "Bless this home." Maggie paused only long enough to pull out her phone and take a single quiet photo. Then she turned and moved into the kitchen. This was where the memory hit hardest. The counters had been replaced with quartz. A massive new refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. There was a 6-burner gas range now, and a touch-activated faucet. She ran her hand along the marble island, her fingers grazing the surface she'd unknowingly helped pay for all those years ago when Brian said they were struggling and asked for a bit of help just to get through the summer. She'd never asked for it back. She took another photo, then moved down the hallway toward the back of the house, bypassing the closed doors of the bedrooms. That wasn't what she'd come for. She was documenting space, not memories. Returning to the foyer, she scanned everything one last time. The framed family portraits on the entry table were perfectly curated. Smiling photos of Brian, Kelly, and Rachel on hiking trips and ski slopes. Maggie wasn't in a single one. She stepped outside and shut the door gently behind her, locking it once more. The sky had begun to cloud over again, softening the sun's harsh edges. The wind picked up just enough to scatter loose snow into little twisters across the lawn as she walked back toward her car. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She didn't answer until she was seated behind the wheel. The screen lit up with Charles's name. "Hello," she said, her voice calm, almost distant. "Maggie," Charles began, "I've reviewed everything, and I've confirmed what I suspected. With your legal status as co-owner, and the length of exclusive occupancy, you could absolutely force a partition action. If they won't buy you out, the court could order the house sold." Maggie sat very still, her hand resting on the wheel, not moving. "So, I could make them sell it?" she asked softly. "Yes," Charles replied. "If you wanted to, you could force a sale." Maggie looked at the house through the windshield. The windows reflected the sky like mirrors, showing nothing of what lay inside. She didn't smile, she didn't nod, but something in her settled, not out of revenge, but out of certainty. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving everything beneath a pale blue sky that made the world look cleaner than it was. Maggie sat once again at her kitchen table, this time with her laptop open, the deed laid beside it like a badge. Her reading glasses slid low on her nose as she scrolled through county law websites, pages of legal language, and real estate forums. She was looking for clarity, but not the emotional kind. Charles had called it partition by sale, a term that sounded like something violent if said with the wrong inflection, though he'd explained it calmly over the phone. A legal path through which a co-owner, if no buyout could be agreed upon, could petition the court to force the sale of the property. Clean, final, strategic. Maggie read and reread the conditions: joint ownership, lack of formal written agreement, long-term sole occupancy by one party. It was all there. She fit every requirement. Her hand hovered over the touchpad before opening a Word document titled Initial Notes, Equity Claim. She began typing slowly at first, like she was learning a new language. Dates, improvements, approximate valuations, mortgage balance remaining. She referred back to the mortgage statement Charles had requested and estimated her equity down to the dollar. When she paused, her gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, children walked home from winter break camps, laughing and pulling sleds. In another world, one of them might have been Rachel, but that world was closed to her now, locked behind a door she once had the key to and still did. A soft knock on the door pulled her from the thought. Tina stepped in without waiting for a reply, her cheeks red from the wind, a brown paper bag in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "I brought scones," she announced. "And retaliation, fuel?" Maggie allowed herself a smile and took the bag, setting it next to her laptop. "You really think this is retaliation?" Tina hung her coat on the back of a chair. "Number, I think it's reckoning. There's a difference." She took the envelope and slid it across the table. "Charles couriered this preliminary draft of the petition, all templated out, just needs your specifics." Maggie opened the flap and pulled out crisp cream-colored paper. Her name sat at the top in bold print. Petitioner. There was something powerful in that, not vindictive, not petty, just official. Whole. Tina sat down, studying her friend's face. "So, what's the plan?" "I'm reviewing valuations, property tax history, market comparisons." Maggie picked up her tea, making sure if this ends up in court, I don't flinch. Tina tilted her head. "You're not going to give them a warning first?" "They didn't warn me before locking the door," Maggie said, not bitter, just observant. Tina sat back in her chair, arms folded. "Kelly deserves a shock, to be honest. She's probably still basking in her little holiday hostess glory." Maggie sighed through her nose. "This isn't about Kelly, it's about me, and about correcting something I let slide for too long." For a moment, they sat in silence. The only sound, the faint clink of a spoon in a mug and the quiet hum of Maggie's laptop. Then her phone buzzed. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the moment she answered, the familiar voice pulled taut across the line. "Hey, Mom, Brian." She sat up straighter. "Brian." A pause. Then carefully, "You've been a little distant. Everything okay?" The weight of that question hung there, absurd in its timing, laced with years of practiced denial. Maggie answered, gently, but without warmth. Just busy. There was another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear him swallowing what he really wanted to say, smoothing it down, like always. Well, let me know if you want to talk. She didn't reply. Not yet. After he hung up, Maggie turned her gaze back to the envelope from Charles. Her finger traced the embossed letterhead, then rested on the signature line. It was blank, but not for long. The voicemail came 2 nights after Brian's hesitant phone call, late, as if it had been recorded after a glass of wine, and not much thought. Maggie had just turned down her bed when the chime echoed through her phone. She almost didn't check it, but then she saw the name, Kelly. No message in weeks. No thank you for the Christmas gift card. No apology for the front porch humiliation, just this. A time-stamped voice recording 63 seconds long. She sat down on the edge of the bed, pressed play, and listened. Kelly's voice came sharp and clipped, the way it did when she was pretending to sound calm but was actually furious. Hi Margaret, I don't know what exactly is going on with you lately, but Brian says you've been cold, and honestly, I'm not surprised. I don't know if this is some passive-aggressive thing because we didn't invite you in, or if you're trying to guilt-trip us, but it's not going to work. You made your choices. You signed things for Brian a long time ago, and that's all it was. Don't start trying to make yourself more important than you are. The message ended with a forced, almost mocking, happy holidays. Maggie didn't move. She saved the voicemail, then backed it up to her laptop and to a flash drive she kept tucked inside her desk, right next to her printed deed and preliminary legal drafts. After a moment's pause, she also transcribed it word for word into her notes. The next morning, she brought everything to Charles. He listened to the voicemail on speaker, leaning back in his leather chair with a pen resting on his lip and one brow lifted in calm amusement. When it ended, he leaned forward and tapped the desk once. Well, he said dryly, if she wanted to provide us with proof of hostile intent and decisiveness, she succeeded beautifully. She doesn't know about the petition yet, Maggie said, her voice even. And that makes it better, he replied, because any aggression that came before legal notice is pure, unprompted hostility. Judges notice tone, they're human. He picked up his pen, scribbled something on a notepad, then looked at her. I'll file this under pattern of exclusion and emotional strain. You just keep doing what you're doing. Quiet, methodical. Let them shout into the void. Maggie nodded. That's the plan. Later that day she met Tina at the cafe, settling into their usual corner booth near the fogged-up window. A warm coffee mug sat between them, steam rising slowly in tight curls. Tina leaned in. Did she really leave you a voicemail? She did, and it was that bad. Maggie stirred her coffee slowly. She called me unimportant. Tina let out a low whistle. If I ever needed an excuse to throw a Danish at her, ... Maggie smiled faintly. Charles thinks it helps the case. Well, good, Tina said, dunking a biscotti. Let her keep helping. They sipped their drinks in silence for a moment, the sounds of clinking mugs and low conversation around them filling the air. Then Tina said, Charles mentioned early spring is best for real estate filings, right? Something about the market picking up. Maggie nodded. March ideally gives us a window to finalize appraisals, let them settle back into their routine. Then we move. You ready for that? Maggie looked out the window. A mother walked past, guiding her bundled child by the hand, the little ones stomping through slush piles like they were puddles of gold. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a moment, she traced a simple arc in the condensation with one fingertip. I'm not waiting for them to change, she said. Just making sure I don't change into someone I wouldn't recognize. That night, while sipping tea and reviewing her notes, she opened her browser and checked Kelly's public social media accounts. Still open, still smug. One photo showed Kelly in a glittering dress at their annual Harris holiday mixer, standing beside the new kitchen island Maggie had touched just weeks before. The caption read, "Cheers to building a beautiful life with the ones who matter most." Maggie took a screenshot, then another, and another. Every caption, every room, every detail she recognized, carefully labeled, dated, and saved in a dedicated folder. Photos, property, use, evidence. By the time she was done, the folder held 16 files. The door had been closed to her, yes, but now they had left a window wide open. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon when Maggie pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store near her apartment, her trunk already half filled with paper bags of dry goods. The clouds had thickened since morning, heavy with the promise of snow that never quite fell. As she reached for her last bag from the cart, she heard the distinct crunch of heels against asphalt behind her. Fast, deliberate, too sharp for a casual stroll. Margaret. Maggie turned slowly. Kelly was striding toward her, coat unzipped despite the chill, lips painted to red, eyes blazing like someone who had waited too long to yell and now didn't care where it happened. "I need to talk to you," Kelly snapped. Maggie straightened her shoulders but didn't move. "Go ahead. You've been digging into property records." Maggie didn't blink. "I've reviewed my own deed." "Yes," Kelly scoffed, breath puffing out in a sharp cloud. "Don't play coy. Why is your name still on my house?" There it was, the moment the illusion cracked. The words spilled out fast and raw, louder than the setting deserved. A mother in yoga pants glanced over, frowning, then ushered her toddler toward a cart return. Maggie's voice was quiet but steady. "It's not your house, Kelly." Kelly's jaw twitched. "Excuse me, it's not just yours, it's ours. Brian and I own it. That's what the county record says. That's what the deed confirms." Kelly sputtered. "That was years ago. You co-signed?" "That's not the same as it is," Maggie interrupted. "And it's never been changed, which means I have rights, legal, enforceable ones." For a second, Kelly said nothing. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like someone trying to force the world back into the shape she preferred, a shape where Maggie stayed small and out of sight. Then, from behind a silver SUV, Brian appeared, his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, eyes down until he realized what was happening. "Maggie, Mom," he said, stepping closer. "Hey, can we not do this here?" Kelly turned on him like a storm. Did you know her name was still on the house?" Brian looked like he'd been slapped. "I thought it was just paperwork left over from the mortgage. I didn't think she just said she owns it." Maggie turned toward him, eyes steady. "You knew. I helped you get that house. You said it yourself, just for a few years, until you could refinance. I didn't think it still." He rubbed his hands over his face. "I didn't think it mattered." "It does now," Maggie said softly, "because I'll be meeting with Charles again this week." Kelly looked like she'd been punched in the throat. "What is this? Some weird vendetta? Are you trying to punish us for one awkward Christmas?" Mag raised her eyebrows slightly. "Is that what you think this is about?" Kelly turned on her heel, muttering something bitter under her breath that Maggie didn't catch. She stalked off across the lot, heels stabbing little dents into patches of ice, car keys flashing in her hand like a weapon she hadn't quite used yet. Brian lingered, his face pale, his mouth drawn. "Please," he said, his voice low, strained. "Don't escalate this." Maggie looked at him, her son, the boy she'd once carried asleep from the back seat. The man who now watched her like she was a storm instead of the weather they'd all ignored for too long. "I'm not escalating," she said. "I'm responding. There's a difference." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, caught between two loyalties, and said nothing at all. Maggie took her grocery bags, placed them carefully into the trunk, and shut it with a quiet thud. Then she walked around the car and got into the driver's seat without another word. By the time she pulled out of the lot, snow had begun to fall, thin and slow, as if the sky itself was hesitating before deciding what came next. The pen didn't shake in her hand. It had been sitting there on Charles's desk for over 10 minutes, uncapped and ready, the dark blue ink already staining the air with a quiet sense of finality. But Maggie had taken her time, not because she was uncertain, but because she understood the weight of this moment. After today, there would be no more misunderstandings, no more blurred lines or assumptions, no more room to pretend. Charles sat across from her, patient as ever, fingers steepled under his chin. "It's a standard partition petition," he'd explained. "You're not asking for damages, only for your legal right to be acknowledged and acted upon. They can either negotiate a buyout, or the court can force a sale." Maggie looked down at the signature line again. Margaret J. Harris. It waited for her like an old version of herself she hadn't spoken to in years. She signed in firm strokes, no hesitation. Charles nodded once, then picked up the petition with a crisp, practiced movement. "I'll have it filed with the county clerk today. Donna will confirm once it's logged in the system." Maggie exhaled slowly, silently. Then she stood. By the time she stepped out of the Lodo office building, the wind had picked up, Denver's skyline shimmered behind her like a jagged promise, and Maggie wrapped her scarf tighter as she walked down the block toward the light rail station. her boots hitting the sidewalk in a rhythm that matched her resolve. The email from Donna came through by Philknone. Subject, case status, Harris v. Harris partition, body. Your filing has been received and marked pending. Docket number included below. Please let me know if you need assistance scheduling preliminary mediation. Donna, title clerk. Maggie read it once, then again, then closed the laptop and went to the kitchen to make tea. She didn't open Facebook that day, but Tina did. The bakery cafe had gone quiet for the late afternoon lull, and Tina had settled in with her phone and a fresh slice of pecan pie when the post came across her feed. Kelly Harris, public post. Isn't it funny how the people who never show up for the hard times suddenly want to claim what isn't theirs? Family should be loyal, not greedy. I've always believed that blood doesn't entitle anyone to someone else's home, love, or life. It was vague, carefully worded, but pointed like a blade. The comments came in fast. Acquaintances with wineglass emojis, and stay strong girl affirmations. No one tagged Maggie. No one needed to. Tina took a screenshot, then another, then texted Maggie. She's panicking. That means it's working. Maggie didn't reply right away. But that evening, she showed up at the cafe just before closing. The air inside smelled of cinnamon and melting butter, and Tina greeted her with a grin and 2 slices of pie already plated. You signed? She asked. Maggie nodded, unwinding her scarf. Tina raised her fork like a toast. 2 women who don't wait for permission. Maggie clinked her own fork against it. 2 women who remember what they're worth. They ate in silence for a few moments, snow falling steadily outside the front window. Then Maggie's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, expecting an update from Charles, but paused when she saw the name, Brian. She excused herself from the table and stepped toward the back hallway, the hum of the fridge masking the faint creak of the floor beneath her feet. She answered quietly. Hi. Hey. Brian's voice was quiet, tight, barely above a whisper. I saw the filing. Kelly did, too. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. I assumed you would. There was a pause. Then the sound of him shifting on the other end, like he was sitting in his car, trying to choose between speed and care. She said. His voice broke off. When it returned, it was lower. She said, if this goes any further, she's leaving. Maggie didn't answer right away. Her hand rested against the cool tile of the wall beside her. She could hear Tina laughing softly with the barista in the front room, the clink of ceramic mugs, stacking. Did she mean it? She asked. Brian sighed, and for the first time, she didn't know if it was from guilt or exhaustion. I think so. Maggie leaned her head gently against the wall, her voice even. That's between the 2 of you, Brian. But if you withdraw it? No, she said. Silence, not harsh, not triumphant, just still. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of the call settle into her body like cold air under a door. Then she walked back to her seat, picked up her fork, and finished her slice of pie. Maggie stared out the window of the bakery cafe long after the pie was gone. The lights inside had dimmed for closing. Tina was in the back wiping down counters and humming off-key to an old James Taylor song playing on the radio. Outside, snow layered gently over the sidewalks, softening the sharp corners of the street and frosting the cars that lined the curb. Her phone buzzed again. Brian. She almost didn't answer. Her hand hovered above the screen as if touching it might burn. Then finally, she pressed it to her ear and said nothing. Mom. His voice was tight, laced with something raw now. Not anger, not even frustration, fear. Maggie closed her eyes. I'm here. He exhaled. Thank you. There was a pause. Then, I didn't mean for any of this to happen like this. I never wanted a fight. Maggie stayed silent. I just. ... He started again. I'm asking you not for Kelly, not for the house, for me. Can you please withdraw the petition? She didn't move. Didn't react. Not yet. Her heart did what it always did in his presence. Even just the sound of him, softened, reached back, remembered the Lego pieces on the carpet, his first scraped knee, the time he'd called from college just to hear her voice. But memory, she had learned, was not the same as reconciliation. Brian, she said gently, if I withdraw the petition, what changes? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe everything. Maybe nothing. But if Kelly leaves, it won't just break my marriage, it'll break Rachel's home. And I know you don't want that. The words sat heavy between them. Maggie pressed her palm flat against the table, grounding herself. I didn't break anything, she said quietly. I didn't close the door on Christmas. I didn't erase a name from the family album. I didn't forget who made that house possible. He didn't argue. He just exhaled again, long and uneven. She's scared, he said after a long silence. She thinks you're trying to humiliate us. I'm not, Maggie said. I'm trying to be seen legally, humanly, honestly. You've always been seen, he said, but the words were hollow, like he didn't even believe them himself. No, she replied, still calm. I've always been tolerated when it was convenient. Brian's voice wavered. I'm asking you to choose peace. She took a breath, let it fill her chest slowly. Then, stand up for me. Silence, not the kind that ends things, but the kind that clarifies everything. He didn't respond. She could hear him blink back tears, maybe rub at his face, maybe sit slouched in the driver's seat of his car with the heater too high and his coat still on. But there was nothing else he could say, and she wouldn't say it for him. She hung up her hands, stayed on the phone a moment longer than necessary. Then she set it down and reached for her coat. Tina emerged from the back, drying her hands on a striped dish towel. Everything okay? No, Maggie said. But I am. Tina studied her face, red-rimmed eyes but steady posture. Then she gave a small, proud nod. They're counting on you, folding. I know. Tina walked over, tossed the towel aside, and pulled Maggie into a hug that was warm, whole, and wordless. When they parted, Tina said, You made something clear tonight. What's that? That you're not just in this to win, you're in this to be heard. Maggie nodded once. Outside, the snow had begun to fall harder, collecting in Maggie's footprints. From earlier until they were nearly gone, the courthouse lobby smelled faintly of old paper, floor polish, and something metallic like dried ink and nerves. Maggie sat on a wooden bench near the window, her gloved hands resting on her lap, her coat draped neatly beside her. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals, dusting the tops of parked cars and the steps where she had stood just moments earlier to collect herself. Charles arrived precisely on time, his coat buttoned to the top, briefcase in hand. He gave her a small nod as he approached. Not formal, not overly sympathetic, just steady. They're already inside, he said softly. Maggie stood, smoothed the hem of her sweater, and followed him through the double doors into courtroom 3B. The space was smaller than she expected. The wood paneling was warm, almost too polished, and the ceiling lights buzzed faintly above them. The air was still, too, like everyone inside was holding their breath. At the other table sat Kelly, perfectly composed in a navy blue blazer, her expression carefully blank. Brian sat beside her, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. He didn't look at Maggie when she entered. She didn't expect him to. The clerk called the session to order, and the judge, an older woman with gray curls tucked beneath her robe, entered without ceremony, her gaze sweeping across the room with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen too many people pretend not to know better. Charles Rose offered a short, respectful introduction. Your Honor, we're here on a petition for partition of residential property, jointly owned by the petitioner Margaret Harris and her son Brian Harris, whose name appears alongside hers on the recorded deed. My client is seeking either mediation or a court-ordered sale due to ongoing, unresolved disputes over ownership rights and access. Kelly's attorney, sleek, younger, and clearly used to speaking fast, stood, with respect, Your Honor. The petitioner is not an active Kona in any functional sense. She co-signed on a mortgage over a decade ago to help her son qualify and has neither lived in nor financially contributed to the property in any meaningful way since that time. This is an emotional grievance, not a legal one. Maggie kept her face still. She didn't fidget. She didn't react. She simply folded her hands on the table and let her breath move slowly through her chest, even and full. Charles didn't blink. We have here a copy of the certified deed from the Denver County Title Office, which clearly lists Ms. Harris as a legal owner, not a guarantor. No quitclaim deed was ever filed. She has remained on the title for 12 years. Additionally, we have proof of direct financial assistance provided to maintain and upgrade the property, evidence that reflects a material investment. He passed the documentation forward. The judge leafed through it without expression. Charles continued, voice steady. My client has not asked to be compensated for emotional distress. She has not sought punitive damages. She is requesting only what she is legally entitled to as a co-owner, either a mediated buyout or a court-supervised sale. Kelly's lawyer tried again. But Your Honor, surely intention must count for something here. No one involved saw her as an active owner. The house was always considered theirs, Brian and Kelly's. The judge looked up and for the first time, her voice cut through the room like a clean blade. The law, she said, is not based on feelings, it is based on documents. You may proceed with arguments if you'd like, but you'll be arguing against recorded evidence. So, I would suggest doing so very carefully. The silence that followed was long and final. By the time the judge delivered her ruling, Maggie already knew what was coming. But still, the words held weight. This court acknowledges that Margaret Harris is a legal owner of the property in question. A period of formal mediation will be scheduled within the next 30 days. If no agreement is reached between the parties, the court is prepared to proceed with a sale and equitable distribution of proceeds. Gavel sharp one strike. Kelly turned her head sharply toward Brian, her lips moving, but no sound escaping. Brian stared at the table. Maggie didn't smile. She didn't look smug. She simply stood when Charles stood, gathered her purse, and walked out without a glance backward. Outside, the snow had begun falling again, not in lazy drifts, but in purposeful lines, straight and fast. She stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, her breath visible in the sharp air, her hands curled inside her coat sleeves. She didn't feel victorious. She felt visible. Her phone buzzed. It was Charles. "Congratulations," he said when she picked up. "It's just the beginning," she replied. He didn't disagree. The office was quieter this time. No court papers, no folders, bulging with property documents or evidence photos, just a simple legal pad, a laptop screen glowing softly on Charles's desk, and a cup of chamomile tea steeping in front of Maggie, untouched. She sat straighter than she had weeks ago. There was no tension in her shoulders, no doubt in her hands, just the quiet certainty of a woman who'd stopped asking permission to exist where she already belonged. Charles looked up from his monitor, glasses pushed halfway down his nose. "We can start whenever you're ready." "I'm ready," she said. He opened a new file, standard language to begin with. "This will supersede your previous documents. Now, beneficiaries." "Rachel," Maggie said. "My granddaughter, 50% of everything. She's still young, but I trust she grow into the kind of person who understands what to do with it." Charles nodded, typing as she spoke. "And the other half to be allocated into a trust," she said, "specifically for a scholarship fund, local for first-year public school teachers in Denver County. Doesn't need my name on it, just needs to exist." Charles paused for a second, as if that last part carried more weight than she'd admitted. "Noted," he said gently. "Do you want to designate any portion to Brian?" "No." The word was not harsh, not bitter, just final. It didn't wobble in her throat. It didn't echo. Charles continued typing. The minutes moved like water, slow, deliberate, each word recorded exactly as she dictated. Furniture, accounts, assets, instructions. It was the kind of control Maggie hadn't realized she needed, not over people, but over legacy, over meaning, over what outlives you and why. She was finishing her tea when the last page printed. "Now, just need a witness," Charles said, standing. "You said Tina was available." "Waiting in the car," Maggie replied, already reaching for her coat. Minutes later, Tina stood beside her in Charles's office, hair still damp from the snow. She read over the summary, eyebrows rising, then falling, then settling into a tight, impressed nod. "You sure?" she asked softly. "I've never been sure." Tina signed the witness line with a flourish and handed Maggie the pen. Maggie signed, too. It was done in seconds. But something inside her shifted with it. Like weight she'd carried across her shoulders for years had simply loosened and fallen to the floor. Charles gathered the documents with the care of someone handling heirlooms. "You'll receive a sealed copy in the mail. Keep it somewhere dry." Maggie stood, adjusting her scarf, her fingers brushing the collar of her coat. "I'll keep it somewhere. I can see it." Outside, the sky was white with winter haze, but the snow had paused for a while. Everything was clean and still. She and Tina walked slowly toward the car, the sidewalk beneath them crunching like brittle sugar. There was no rush, no deadline. The future, for once, didn't feel like something looming. It felt shaped. Tina glanced over. "That was one hell of a signature back there," Maggie smiled. "It's easier when you're signing something for yourself, not someone else." Tina reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a wrapped caramel from the bakery's countertop stash, and pressed it into Maggie's hand like it was currency. Legacy tastes sweeter when it's yours, Maggie chuckled, slipping it into her pocket. She stopped before opening the passenger door, turned, and looked back at the building behind her. The windows reflected only sky now, not her, not the past, just light. She closed her eyes for a beat, inhaled, exhaled. For the first time in a long time, she felt her chest rise without tension. The voicemail came mid-morning, 3 days after the court ruling was finalized. No ranting this time, no veiled threats or trembling rage, just Brian's voice, lower than usual, stripped of its usual smoothness. She left, he said, took Rachel to her sister's, said she needed time. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Maggie sat at her kitchen table, mug of tea in her hand, the light coming in soft through the window. She didn't move. She didn't even press replay. Once was enough. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, no vindication, only a muted ache that pressed low in her chest, the kind you get from holding a pose too long, only realizing afterward how tightly you'd been clenched. Later that afternoon, Charles called with the update. The judge had signed the mediation report, and Brian had agreed to the buyout. He waived the right to further negotiation. Charles said, "It's done. The numbers were fair, down to the decimal. Property value, market growth, historical payments, and equity division." It had taken 2 appraisals and 3 weeks of tense silence, but Brian had signed the agreement. "They're overnighting the check," Charles added. "It should arrive by Friday." Maggie thanked him. She didn't ask how Brian had looked during the signing. She didn't need to know. When Friday came, the envelope was thick and rigid, the kind used for legal disbursements. The check was folded inside with a cover letter typed on heavy stock paper, each word precise and impersonal. Tina drove her to the bank. She didn't ask twice. She just showed up in her bakery apron, a flower on her sleeve, and said, "Let's go make something permanent." They parked in front of the First National branch downtown, the snow still clinging to the sidewalk in soft slush piles. Inside, the bank smelled like cold air and carpet cleaner. Maggie sat with a teller who smiled too brightly and said, "Congratulations." Without knowing what she was congratulating her for, Tina waited beside her, hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the numbers flicker on the screen as the deposit processed. Afterward, they walked the long way back to the car, passing through Civic Park, where the last of the city's winter lights still clung to the trees. "You going to keep it all?" Tina asked, nudging her shoulder. Maggie shook her head. "Half is already spoken for." She made the donation that evening quietly, anonymously. She didn't call it a gift, she called it a beginning. The fund went to a local foundation already supporting new educators. She earmarked it for Denver County's first-year public school teachers, those who taught in overburdened districts, those who paid for pencils out of their own pockets, those who stayed after class to explain decimals and molecules and syntax, those who kept showing up when no one was clapping for them. Rachel's teachers, future teachers, women who gave more than they were given. When the form asked for a dedication line, she typed, "For the ones who make space when no one else does." She clicked submit. Then she stood, walked to the kitchen window, and looked out across the street where light had begun to gather in the frost-covered trees. Her phone buzzed. A few minutes later, Martin. She'd almost forgotten about the realtor Tina had mentioned back in January. Friendly, fast-talking, absurdly optimistic. She'd dismissed it then. Not anymore. The message was short. "Hey Maggie, I know it's a long shot, but a Victorian just opened up 2 blocks from you. Full wrap-around porch, corner lot. Needs love, but it's got soul. Want to see it." She read it twice, then again. Tina's words floated back from weeks ago. "Legacy tastes sweeter when it's yours." Maggie looked toward her hallway where the folder, with her will now sat on a shelf in clear view. Then back to her phone. "Maybe I do," she whispered, and for the first time in a very long time, she tapped reply. The house sat quietly at the corner of Chestnut and 6th, wrapped in soft light and snow-dusted hedges. It wasn't grand in the way new builds were. No gleaming panels or smart doorbells, but it had presence, a kind of held breath. Maggie stood across the street in her winter coat, hands in her pockets, just looking. Martin waved from the porch, bundled in a thick parka and scarf, his clipboard clutched like a preacher's Bible. "You made it," he called, grinning. "I said I might," Maggie replied, but she was already walking across the slush-slick road. the corners of her mouth pulling upward despite herself. He opened the door like a magician, revealing a trick. Wait till you see the inside. The foyer smelled faintly of cedar and old lemon polish. Wooden banisters curved up in a wide, sweeping staircase. High ceilings stretched above her with crown molding that had survived a century of paint jobs and patchwork. The hardwood floors creaked softly underfoot, not with age exactly, but with memory. Sunlight streamed through tall front windows, falling in wide sheets across the parlor floor. Maggie moved slowly, her fingers trailing the wall, the door frames, the curved molding around the windows. She stepped into what must have been the formal dining room once, a space ringed with built-in shelves, an antique brass light fixture hanging low from the ceiling. Martin stood back, watching her take it in. The family who owned it moved to Portland. Been in their name since the 70s. It's old Denver through and through, he said. Needs work. New plumbing. Probably a roof inspection. But the bones, he grinned. They don't build bones like this anymore. Maggie crossed to the back door, pushing it open. The porch spanned the full back of the house, weathered but solid. Beyond it, the yard was narrow but fenced. A patch of garden lay asleep under a sheet of snow. A red cardinal flitted from one low branch to another, as if guarding it. She stood there a long moment, letting the wind find her cheeks. I used to dream of porches, she said absently. Somewhere to sit and not rush. Martin pulled the door gently closed behind her when she stepped back inside. It's priced low because of the condition, but it's solid, he repeated. And in this neighborhood, these don't last long. Maggie pulled the folded check from her coat pocket. Martin blinked. Wait, you're serious? I don't need a mortgage or an inspection to know what I want. He stared at the check. Full offer. She nodded. Martin exhaled like he'd just caught a touchdown pass in the last second of a game. Consider it done. I'll put the paperwork together tonight. They walked out together, her boots crunching in the patchy snow. She lingered on the porch steps a second longer than necessary, then turned to look at it again. A woman across the street waved. Another man nodded as he passed with a leashed beagle. Nothing dramatic, just quiet acknowledgement. Maggie smiled to herself. She wasn't invisible here. By sunset, Tina was knocking on her door, a chilled bottle of champagne in one hand and two mismatched flutes clinking in the other. I heard through the grapevine, she said, not bothering to hide her grin. Martin called Marcy, who told Donna, who told Cheryl at the bakery, who immediately called me. You all really do operate like an underground network. We prefer the term grassroots. Tina handed her a glass. To Maggie Harris, porch owner, deed holder, and queen of the clean break. They clinked glasses. Maggie took a sip, letting the bubbles settle behind her teeth before swallowing. I didn't think I'd want a house again, she said. After everything, I thought I just wanted closure. And now I want doorways for people I choose, and windows for light, and a table with too many chairs. Tina nodded, serious now. So, what are you going to do with all that space? Maggie didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the folder, still sitting on her hallway shelf. Her will, her deed, her copy of the check. Beside it sat the #1 Nana keychain, freshly polished, its enamel chipped, but still catching the light. Then she looked out the window where her new house waited in the dark and smiled. The first snow of December came softly, the way true snow should. Quiet, almost reverent, the kind that doesn't just fall, but arrives, making everything look like it's been waiting for this exact moment to exhale. Maggie stood in the front room of the Victorian, adjusting the last fork on the dining table with a precision that wasn't about perfection, but about care, intentionality. The house smelled of cinnamon, rosemary, and something deep. Warming up again. Through the windows, the last light of day glowed across the rooftops of Chestnut Street. Inside, laughter was already blooming in the kitchen. Do not touch that pie yet, Tina called out mock stern as Rachel tried to sneak a finger across the crust's edge. I was just checking the temperature. Rachel grinned, bright-eyed, all legs and warmth and teenage awkwardness made radiant by affection. Well, your Nana's famous apple bourbon pie doesn't check itself, Tina quipped, setting down a tray of roasted vegetables with a flourish. Respect the sacred. Maggie chuckled from the dining room. She gets it honest. You should have seen her dad at 12. A slight hush passed through the air after that, just long enough to be noticed. Then Rachel stepped in beside her grandmother and asked, "Need me to light the candles?" Maggie nodded, handing her the matches. "Please." As Rachel struck the first match and leaned in, the flicker cast golden shadows across the polished table. It wasn't grand, just wide enough to seat 10 with mismatched chairs that Tina had thrifted from 3 different estate sales, but it held everything it needed: good food, kind people, and a warmth that had taken its time getting here. Neighbors arrived one by one. Mr. Rodriguez from across the street with a tray of tamales, the Moores from the corner house bringing homemade rolls and stories of their bickering beagles. Each arrival came with snow dust on their shoulders and easy smiles like they knew they'd been expected. The conversation swirled, laughter rose and folded into itself. Maggie moved between chairs with quiet grace, refilling water glasses, brushing crumbs off elbows, leaning in to hear stories of grandchildren and basement leaks and fourth-grade science fairs. When it came time for dessert, she brought out the pie herself. No ceremony, no announcement, just the hum of comfort as she set it down and sliced it with steady hands. Rachel leaned in from across the table. "You still make it better than any bakery." Maggie smiled, brushing a bit of flour from her apron. "It's the bourbon," she said, and the table erupted into approving murmurs. After coffee was poured and second helpings declined, and the volume dipped into a soft hum of full stomachs and fuller hearts, Maggie drifted to the front window, tea in hand. Outside, the street lamp haloed the falling snow like a spotlight, and beneath it, alone, walking slowly with his coat buttoned too high and his head down, was Brian. He didn't look up, he didn't knock, he just kept walking, his boots leaving prints that filled quickly behind him, as if even the snow wasn't sure whether to hold on to him. Maggie watched him for a long moment. Her hand rested against the window frame, not aching, not angry, just still. There had been a time when she would have run out after him, called his name, tried again, but some doors didn't close because of anger. They closed because someone kept walking through them with muddy feet and no apology. She turned back to the room. Rachel was curled against Tina's side on the couch, laughing at some joke about teachers and glue sticks. Someone in the dining room had begun quietly singing along to the holiday song playing through the Bluetooth speaker. The air smelled like pie and pine and something too elusive to name, but it felt like presence. Maggie walked back to the table, gathered the empty plates, and stacked them neatly. Tina reached over and squeezed her wrist. "This," she said, voice low, "this is yours now." Maggie didn't reply. She didn't need to. She looked around at the half-finished pie, the flickering candles, the scraped dishes, the muddy boots by the door that did belong, and she felt it deep in her ribs. Some doors close, but I'll always have a place at my own table.